They pulled him from his throne, 60 lashes, 60 strikes from rods made of living fire, and the creature being beaten was not a demon, not a fallen thing. It was the being described in the oldest mystical texts as the closest thing to God that has ever existed, a being called YHWH Ha-Qatan, the lesser god. What was its crime? It had a chair. The texts don't stop there. Before this cosmic lord was dragged into servitude and broken, it had a name you'd recognize, a name that meant something human, because it was human, a man of flesh and blood, pulled from this world, unmade cell by cell, and rebuilt into something so terrifying that the ancient world spent centuries trying to erase the memory of what it had become. This is not mythology, this is a cover-up. This is the story of Metatron. Chapter 1, The Man Who Was Erased. Before there was a cosmic terror, there was a man. His name was Enoch, a name that appears in Genesis like a fault line splitting the earth. In a long, grinding list of men who lived and then died, Enoch's entry is a cold break in the pattern, a glitch in the chronicle. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him. No death, no burial, no body, just a divine removal. The verse hangs in the silence like a question that was never meant to be answered. For centuries, it has been a source of quiet dread. What does it mean to walk so close to a divine force that you are simply erased? The Bible falls silent, but the forbidden texts do not. The books deemed too dangerous to be canon lean into that void and fill it with something worse than silence. They describe a man whose righteousness was not a virtue, but a beacon, a signal, one that made him the target for a destiny no mortal was ever meant to survive. He wasn't just going to see heaven, he was going to become its most terrifying specimen. Chapter 2, The Unmaking. The journey upward was not an ascension. It was an abduction followed by a biological atrocity. Forbidden mystical texts describe Enoch being pulled apart by forces with no name in any human language, dragged through the highest celestial layers to be systematically deconstructed. This was not about receiving a halo or a set of wings. This was a hostile redesign of his biology at the deepest possible level, a divine vivisection, his flesh inverted, turning to living flame. His veins stopped carrying blood and became conduits for raw fire. His eyes melted in their sockets. In their place, bolts of lightning. His pupils, flaming torches that no longer perceived light but saw the screaming architecture of creation itself. His mortal frame was stretched and broken and rebuilt at a scale that dwarfs human comprehension. A crown of pure terror was placed upon what remained of his skull, and with this agonizing transfiguration, this unmaking of everything he once was, came a new name, Metatron, an alien word not found in primary scripture. Some believe it means one who serves behind the throne. Others say guide. But to the man who was Enoch, the man who no longer existed, it was the name of his replacement. The human had been incinerated, overwritten. Something else now wore his history like a mask, the throne of blasphemy. In the celestial court, no angel is permitted to sit. Standing is servitude. It is a law absolute and eternal, the most ancient signal of the difference between the Creator and the created. That privilege belongs to God alone, and yet Metatron was given a throne. This was not an honor, it was a symptom. His presence warped the fabric of heaven. His authority was so total, his connection to the Creator so complete and so wrong, that he was branded with a title that tore at the heart of monotheism like a blade. YHWH Ha-Qatan, the lesser Yahweh, the lesser God. The Book of 3 Enoch records that God himself proclaimed this name before the entire heavenly host, a declaration that sent tremors through the celestial order. because in that moment, heaven had a problem it could not solve quietly. This being was not a servant, it was a mirror, a second power in the cosmos that shared the divine nature, standing where only God should stand, named with a name only God should carry. To look upon Metatron was to see a wound in the face of the divine, a living heresy whose very existence whispered something ancient and monstrous. God is not alone. Chapter 3, The Theological Plague. The idea spread like infection. For a time, the concept of a second subordinate God circulated in the hidden currents of Second Temple Judaism, a framework the scholars would later call two powers in heaven. It was a desperate attempt to solve an impossible equation. How does a singular, perfect, unknowable God touch a dirty, physical world? The answer, terrifying in its implications, was that he doesn't. He sends something else, something that wears his authority like a skin. The Hebrew Bible itself festers with this duality. The book of Daniel contains a vision of two figures, one called the Ancient of Days, radiant with absolute authority, and another described only as one like a son of man, who approaches the throne and is given dominion over all creation. Two thrones, two figures, one kingdom. This was the wound that would not close. When the sect that would become Christianity began to rise, they seized this tradition like a weapon. They pointed to a man from Nazareth and declared him the Son of Man from Daniel's vision, the physical word of the invisible God. The second power made flesh. It was the final straw. The framework that had quietly allowed for a horror like Metatron had now spawned a rival faith. The rabbinic establishment did not simply condemn, they moved to erase. The two powers doctrine was declared a heresy so catastrophic it threatened to dissolve the foundations of their world. Every trace had to be burned out of history. Every text that permitted the question had to be buried. The cover-up had begun, the humiliation. The execution was documented. The Talmud records it with surgical precision. A high-ranking rabbi, Elisha ben Abuyah, makes the journey to the heavens and finds Metatron on his throne. The sight destroys him, because only God can sit. And yet here is this creature, seated, luminous, and vast. The rabbi shatters. Perhaps there are two powers in heaven. The infection had spread. To cauterize the wound, something had to be done, something public, something permanent. Metatron, the lesser god, was seized by other angels, held down, and given 60 lashes with rods of pure fire. The image is impossible to ignore. A godlike being, the closest thing to the divine that has ever worn a human origin, writhing as its luminous form is beaten and burned, broken in front of witnesses, then told the truth about itself. That throne, not an honor, a workstation, a glorified clerk's stool, granted only so the scribe could do his job, recording human sins in the celestial ledger. The rabbis didn't just punish Metatron, they performed a narrative execution. They stripped away the divine aura, broke the body, rewrote the purpose, and reasserted the only truth they could afford to believe. God is one, and nothing else comes close. And yet, here we are, still talking about him. Metatron endures. He is the ghost embedded in the machinery of monotheism. The man who was mutilated into something divine. The scribe of our fates. The power that once wore God's name. No matter how many times the ancient world tried to flog him back into the shadows, the question he represents refuses to die. The boundary between human and divine is terrifyingly thin. What happened to Enoch was not an ascension, it was a consumption. A force that the texts describe as simply taking him reached across the boundary of our world and used a human body as raw material to build something it needed, something it could not build any other way. And when that thing became too powerful, too much like what it was made from, They didn't destroy it. They couldn't. They just heard it until it stayed quiet. The question is not whether Metatron was real. The question is, whose flesh will be the raw material for the next one? If that question keeps you awake at night, you belong here. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and descend with us into the next forbidden archive. The darkness is just getting started.